Every story has its hero.
This is where it begins.
Maybe it's time you find out who you really are.
I'm kind of a big deal around here.
You're fired. Bit dramatic.
New for 2024.
She's wonderful.
On BBC iPlayer.
What role should the monarchy play in Britain today? A question for Sunday Morning Live in an hour. BBC One, always up for discussion with Laura.
Happy 2024. Happy election year. And none other than the Prime Minister is here.
The year is here. A general election means fireworks. Probably, although don't bet on it, at the end of the year.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year, and in the meantime I've got lots that I want to get on with.
Keir Starmer's practising working the crowd.
I think the country's ready for a general election. Turn its back on this decline and usher in the hope and change that a Labour government can bring.
Plenty to smile about. Labour's still far ahead in the polls. The Conservatives have practical, not just political problems. A flat economy, NHS strikes and waiting lists, and splits inside the party on immigration. Even some of the country underwater. And yet another by-election that Labour fancies to win. So we have one big question this morning. What could Rishi Sunak do if he wants to make history for the right reasons and win the Conservatives a fifth term?
So could Rishi Sunak really turn things round? We'll ask the man himself. He faces a Labour Party that wants to push, yes, education, education, education. Their Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is with us too.
Suspended. Locked out my own post office till I pay it all back.
26,000.
And as Westminster wakes up to the true scale of the post office scandal, we'll meet Lee Castleton, one of the sub-postmasters who lost everything. Morning, morning, and a very happy new year to you. Thank you for joining us at the start of what will be a huge 12 months when your votes will be courted and then counted. Happy New Year too to my team at the desk. We have reassembled the trio who marked Rishi Sunak's homework when we spoke to him last. The impressionist John Coleshaw, government troubleshooter Louise Casey, and the editor of the Tory Bible, The Spectator magazine. A warm welcome to all of you. Let's start looking at the front pages today. The Sunday Times says the government is looking at ways of clearing post office managers whose lives have been ruined by that big scandal. We'll ask Rishi Sunak what that means later. The Observer suggests we'll get a first sniff of the COVID inquiry findings with an interim report in the summer. Could be interesting with an election ahead. Rishi Sunak has told the Sunday Telegraph he wants to pay for tax cuts by bearing down on the welfare bill. How will he explain that later? The Sunday Mirror says Prince Andrew will resist any attempt to get him to move out of his royal mansion. And The Sun on Sunday focuses on the death of Derek Draper, influential New Labour figure and Kate Garraway's husband, who grappled so long with the after effects of COVID. There's been a huge and understandable outpouring of sympathy for that family after such a long struggle. Our main event today, though, welcome to you three, is of course speaking to the Prime Minister. It's his first big interview of January 2024. Things don't look good, Fraser, but what do you think he needs to do this morning?
Give some reasonable grounds for hope that things are going to get better at the end of the year. Everything's been going the wrong way for him, by and large, from NHS waiting lists to the tax burden. Will he be able to persuade us that taxes are going down when in fact they're going up? This is a big part of his verbal conundrum, so let's see if he manages to run that gauntlet with you, Laura.
Louise, what do you think we might hear from him?
Well, I think we'll hear that, yet again, a Conservative Prime Minister is going to crack down on benefits. It's like, 'twas ever thus, difficult times ahead, let's go for the benefit system. I hope it isn't quite as straightforward as that and there's something more sophisticated in it. But my worry is it's like, been here, done it, say it all over again.
And you think that will just be the repetition of something Conservatives have tried before?
Rinse and repeat, and that isn't going to get them anywhere. It's not going to get any politician anywhere in this election year. People have to say something new, different, that we can actually believe in.
John, do you have any sympathy, though, for Rishi Sunak? I mean, he inherited a very bad situation. He's been behind in the polls for a long, long time, but much of what he has to deal with was maybe not of his creation.
Indeed, Rishi seems to be a spreadsheet sort of fellow. He sorts problems out with the view of a quadratic equation almost, in that sort of manner. There's hardly a long-term record to be reassured by here, so it seems the only way to perhaps win is by lots of short-term sweeteners, done in a short-termist way. That can maybe prompt mistakes. So it might be a very entertaining year.
Well, it might be a very entertaining year. It might also be a very long year. Fraser, just lastly to you before we begin our interview, Rishi Sunak said this week that the election is going to be in the second half of the year, but he didn't rule it out in the spring. But for viewers watching this morning, should they be actually pretty confident or disappointed or happy that actually the election is going to be probably in November?
Well, it depends how much you like Tory government, I suppose. But the odds are he'll have a conference in October, election in November. But let's face it, he's got the power to call one in May if he still wants one. And he hasn't ruled that out either.
So don't pay too much attention to him saying it will be in the back half of the year, because it still could come earlier.
It's not a promise. It's, what did you call it, a working assumption?
A working assumption, even though he's the one with the power to make the decision. OK, well, all three of you, I know you'll be listening very carefully along with our audience. So, pencil in the autumn, as Fraser told us, but don't be totally surprised if it pops up in the spring. But either way, the parties this year will spend every waking hour trying to entice you to give them your vote. Because 2024 will see that magical moment when the public is truly in charge at a general election, with the chance to reward the resident of number 10 or kick them out if they had enough. It will be the 5th general election since 2010, and in all of the others, the Tories came out on top.
Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government. I will now form a majority Conservative government.
Not another one? Nothing has changed.
The Conservatives are the largest party.
We did it. We pulled it off, didn't we?
Well, he's here, Rishi Sunak. Welcome to the studio. It's great to have you here at the beginning of a very important year. There's so much to talk about. We want to start talking about immigration. We know it's one of your top priorities. We also know from documents the BBC saw this week that when you were Chancellor, you expressed doubts about number 10's desire to send migrants to Rwanda. Do you admit that you had reservations?
No, I'm not saying I haven't seen these documents, so I can't comment on them specifically, but I discussed it with the Prime Minister and ultimately funded the plans and the scheme, and my job now as Prime Minister is to get it up and running. And I believe that it's really important because it's about deterrence. The National Crime Agency has said that you need to have a deterrent to solve this problem. I believe that, which is why I got a new deal with Albania shortly after becoming PM, which means we can return thousands of people to Albania. And we've seen the numbers arriving from Albania drop by over 90%. That shows that deterrence works. And that's what the Rwanda scheme is about. It's about providing that deterrent. And that's why it's important we get it through Parliament.
Well, the interesting thing is that the documents that I've seen, that were number 10 documents from 2022, describe your view as believing that the deterrent would not work. Do you deny that?
Again, I haven't seen these documents, Laura, so I can't comment on them. But what I can
deny that you had doubts about the deterrent effect of sending people to Africa.
The proof is in my actions. I obviously believe that deterrence works because when I became Prime Minister, I prioritised getting a scheme up and running with Albania, which is now working. We've returned over 5,000 people to Albania as a result of that new deal. We've seen the numbers coming from Albania drop by over 90%. That shows you that deterrence works, and I know that deterrence works. That's why I prioritise getting that up and running. And by the way, the National Crime Agency also believe that deterrence works.
But it's important to be crystal clear with our audience here. We're asking you about this controversial scheme to send migrants arriving on UK shores to Rwanda. We're not asking you about what happened with the returns deal with Albania. Do you deny completely that you ever had any doubts about the efficacy or the value for money of sending migrants to Rwanda?
Right, so let's separate these things. I absolutely believe in the value and importance of having deterrence. And Albania and Rwanda are linked because they're both returns agreements that allow you to create deterrence. Now, in terms of the scheme, I was Chancellor at the time. My job is to make sure that we get value for money for taxpayers to ask questions whenever anybody wants to spend taxpayers' money. I would expect the same thing of the Chancellor now. So, of course, I would rigorously scrutinise any proposal that crossed my desk. But ultimately, I agreed with the Prime Minister and we funded the proposal. So the proof is in my actions.
You admit then that you had hesitation about whether or not the scheme was value for money. You've told people when you moved into number 10 you wanted the highest standards of accountability and integrity. So what we're asking about is being accountable for how you came to that decision. Did you then have hesitations about whether it would be value for money?
I think you're really, expanding this beyond what it is. As Chancellor, my job is to scrutinise and ask tough questions of every single proposal that crosses my desk. That's my job, as when I was Chancellor. It's the Chancellor's job now, because ultimately this is all taxpayers' money. And just because someone's asking tough questions doesn't mean that they don't believe in the proposal. And what they should do, though, is make sure that it is gone through a process of rigorous scrutiny. And I went through that process and ended up being satisfied that it would deliver, which is why I agreed with the Prime Minister to fund the proposal. And then when I became Prime Minister, we've obviously put new legislation before Parliament, and we've got the Albania scheme up and running, which is a similar version of deterrence.
And I'm not saying it was a good thing or a bad thing for you as Chancellor to ask those questions. I'm also not suggesting it was a good or a bad thing for you to have doubts and then change your mind. But this is absolutely one of your core priorities now. So I want to be crystal clear with the audience. Are you admitting that you had hesitations about
No, so I
value
think
for money
that's
of this scheme?
the distinction that you're trying to draw, which I don't think is fair.
So what did you have then?
My job is to ask probing questions of every proposal that crosses my desk as Chancellor. Whether you have doubts about it or not, you shouldn't come to it with a preconceived notion that everything is fine when you're spending taxpayers' money. Of course you shouldn't. You should always ask probing questions. You should always approach things from a position of scepticism to ensure that you get value for money for taxpayers. That's the job of the Chancellor and the Treasury when things cross their desk. But to infer from that I don't believe in the scheme or the principle of deterrence is wrong. I was doing my job to get good value for money for taxpayers. I went through that process, funded the scheme with the Prime Minister, and as Prime Minister, myself, as you can see, I've made sure that we have a similar deterrence working with Albania, and I've made the point, actually, that it's because Albania is working that we should have confidence that the Rwanda scheme will work too.
It is curious, though, then, that the view in number 10, as the documents that I've seen clearly say, was that you had doubts about the deterrence. I'm just going to get this absolutely on the record, and I'm not asking you to comment on leaked documents. I'm asking you to say completely clearly whether you ever had any doubts about whether or not sending migrants to Africa from UK shores would put people off making the journey across the Channel.
Well, this hasn't been tried before in our country. I mean, it's fair to say it is novel. I've been very clear that this is a novel scheme. Of course it's novel, but actually we should have more confidence today that it will work precisely because we've got a returns agreement with Albania that is working incredibly well.
And a separate thing about sending people back to the country that they were
no,
from.
The principle. Well, that's where I disagree with you, because I think the principle is the same. Because the principle is this: if you come here illegally, you shouldn't be able to stay here, and you will be returned either to your home country or indeed to a safe alternative like Rwanda. The principle is that you won't be able to stay here because we will have somewhere else to send you. And that is the deterrence that I think is so important. The National Crime Agency agrees, and that's why I'm so keen to get this scheme up and running. But look, people will disagree. The Labour Party disagrees with that principle, by the way, about having a deterrence and having a workable returns agreement. My view is you cannot solve this problem without having a proper deterrent, and Rwanda is how we will deliver that.
And Keir Starmer will be here next week, so we'll put lots of questions.
I'm sure you will ask him.
We will ask him lots of questions
how you solve this problem without a deterrent like Rwanda.
Today we're here to talk about what you think. this is all critically important, not just because it's important to the public, not just because you've made it a centrepiece of your premiership, but also some of your colleagues aren't really convinced that you really mean what you say when it comes to immigration. The man who was immigration minister until not long ago, Robert Jenrick, who's also a friend and a former ally of yours, he says this morning that your position is sophistry. In other words, you're sort of misleading people. You don't really mean it. You say you'll do whatever it takes to get this policy off the ground. You want to pass new laws to do that. But this is a technical question, but a very important one. If the European courts put down what's called a Rule 39, like an emergency measure to stop a plane taking off from the UK to go to Rwanda, would you ever be willing to ignore a Rule 39 order?
Well, there's lots in there, but what I'd say first and foremost, I am determined to stop the boats. And I believe, first of all, let me explain why I believe it's important. I believe it's about a simple matter of fairness. Right? This isn't something abstract or practical. This is about fairness. I don't think it's right for people to jump the queue to come to our country illegally. It puts untold pressure on our public services.
You've said it many times. I'd like you to address this specifically.
Yeah, sure.
I'm
happy to do.
A Rule 39?
I've been very clear about this. I won't let a foreign court stop our ability to remove people once we have been through our process of Parliament and our court system. I've been crystal clear about that because I believe it's really important.
So being crystal clear, does that mean ignoring a Rule 39 measure?
I don't need to speculate about the future. I'm very confident
that's the rub. Forgive me. Prime Minister, you've said you'll do whatever it takes. You've said you won't let a foreign court stop it happening. The practical way in which that could happen would be a Rule 39. Would you or would you not ever ignore a Rule 39?
There's lots of steps between now and then. I'm actually entirely confident that what we're doing is compliant with all our international obligations, but I've been clear. I've been crystal clear. I won't let a foreign court block our ability to remove people safely to Rwanda if we get to that point.
That question.
I've been very clear. I've said it multiple times. Now, when it comes to the specifics of how we do this, first we have to get the bill through Parliament. And that's, I'm sure when Keir Starmer's here next week, we'll be able to ask him, if you really believe in stopping this problem, why are you not supportive of a workable deterrent like Rwanda? And then we will make sure that we can safely remove people. Now, that's how I believe we will solve this problem. But you asked before, which I think is incredibly important, am I really committed to resolving this problem? Well, here are the facts. Before I became Prime Minister, the number of illegal arrivals into this country across the Channel had quadrupled in the past few years.
And the fact is,
since I've been Prime Minister, they have gone down because of the actions of this government. They've gone down not by a little, they've gone down by over a third.
And legal migration has continued
whilst
to go.
Across the rest of Europe, they have risen.
Okay,
so that's our track record on this issue. We are making progress, but there's more to do.
We've got a lot to talk about this morning, and I really want to move on. But I also want to say, you say you're being crystal clear. It is crystal clear also this morning that you are not answering the question about whether or not you would ever ignore a Rule 39. And I want to just point that out and get that on the record. No, Prime Minister, you've answered the question.
No, I have been very clear.
But you haven't answered that, and we must move on.
You can read the legislation that we are passing very specifically, which addresses this issue of Rule 39s, makes it crystal clear that it's a matter for ministers to decide at the time on the circumstances of the Rule 39 that is issued. So, yes, you can't give a blanket answer to that question, but the legislation that we are passing is crystal clear that it is ministers who will have the power to decide about Rule 39s, and I've been very clear that I won't let a foreign court block our ability to remove people safely to Rwanda once we have got the bill through Parliament.
Let's check on another one of the promises that you made to the public. We talked a lot about this a year ago. You've said that you promised to get waiting lists down. Now, there has been some progress in those waiting the longest, but overall, waiting lists are still going up. Is it actually still a promise you're committed to the public, that you're going to get waiting lists down?
Yes, of course it is. And when I made the pledge, and thank you for acknowledging that we have made progress on the longest waiters, where we've virtually eliminated those waiting 2 years and then 1.5 years. And I always said it would be around spring of this year that we would start to see the waiting list fall properly. Now, in spite of the record resources we've put into the NHS, more doctors, more nurses, community diagnostic centres, we are treating more people than ever before in the NHS history, but the waiting lists have not come down, as I would like.
7.71 million people waiting for procedures.
It's far too long. It's far too long. Now, what I would say is, yes, that has happened on my watch. I absolutely accept that. As I said, we've put record resources in, more doctors, more nurses, community diagnostic centres. We're doing all the right things, treating more people. We've obviously been hindered by industrial action. And what I'd say to people is, look, if you see what happened towards the end of last year, we had a period without any strikes in the NHS. And what did we see? We saw the waiting list fall, tens of thousands, by 65,000 over the period of October. Waiting lists started to fall when you had a period without industrial action. So that actually gives me the confidence to know that once we can resolve the outstanding industrial action, and I'm sure we'll talk about that we will be able to see waiting lists fall because of the extra investment and resources that we've put into the NHS.
So if strikes have been the problem, and actually the evidence on how much they contribute to the waiting list is mixed, but clearly it is part of the problem. If strikes are part of the problem, are you willing to improve your offer to junior doctors? There is nearly 9% already being offered to them and another 3% on the table. But to get them back to work, to get them back onto the wards, to stop this having an impact on patients, would you put more on the table?
Well, we already have. And I think, again, if you look at the government's track record when it comes to resolving industrial action...
I'm asking if you'd put more...
If I could just answer the question, because I think it's important to have the context. The government has now reached resolution with every other part of the NHS. Nurses, midwives, paramedics, consultant doctors, specialty doctors most recently. So every other part of the NHS workforce, and I'm grateful to them for everything they're doing, has reached a resolution with the government on a reasonable, fair pay settlement. The only people that haven't are the junior doctors. The numbers that you gave, if I could just finish answering, the numbers that you gave demonstrate that actually the pay offer that the junior doctors already have is more generous than any other part of the NHS. So those are the facts, right? And so given that we have managed to find resolution everywhere else, and that the junior doctors have now the most generous pay offer out of anybody in the NHS, I would strongly urge them to come back, talk to the government so that we can resolve this industrial action and start getting the waiting list down, as the evidence shows that we can do when there aren't strikes happening.
What do you think the chances are of resolving it?
Well, I said it's ultimately a question for the junior doctors. The question I'm sure you will be asking them is why, when they have the most generous pay settlement in the NHS, why, when every other part of the NHS workforce, nurses, midwives, paramedics, consultant doctors, have reached an agreement with the government, why haven't they? Because, as I said, what's clear is we can get the waiting list down when we don't have strikes. That's what the numbers show. That's what everybody wants to see. I think that's what the doctors would like to see too. And I would urge them to try and come back round the table so that we can get everyone back in and we can start getting the waiting list falling, which is what everyone wants.
And many people watching this morning might wish, actually, that your ministers had tried to resolve these strikes a long, long time ago, because for many months, some of your colleagues sat in the chair and said, we won't budge, there's no more money. And then there was more money in the end. And the strikes, in many people's view, have contributed to a sense that many people genuinely feel in the country, that things just aren't working very well. One of our viewers, Gary, wanted us to put this to you. He said, and we can show you what he said, from NHS delivery to potholes on roads and everything in between, delivery's getting worse. It's not good enough to blame COVID or wars. The bottom line is it feels worse in this country for many ordinary people. Is he wrong?
I think, well, I was here almost exactly a year ago. You and I were talking about the outlook for the country over the course of last year. If you think about what was being said then, people were projecting that we would have a year-long deep recession this year. Well, in fact, we've avoided that, outperformed countries like Germany. Inflation, having an impact on Gary and everyone else, was running at close to 11%. It's now been more than halved and it's less than 4%. And the notion that we'd be able to cut taxes for people like Gary to put more money in his bank account was fanciful. But in fact, the Chancellor's just announced £20 billion of tax cuts.
They came in this weekend.
For someone earning £35,000, that's a tax cut worth £450.
Let's be clear on that point.
All of that shows to me that we have made progress. The plan is working. We're starting to deliver the long-term change that our country needs, that I want to deliver for Gary. And the job now is to stick to that plan so that we can give him and everyone else peace of mind that the future is going to be better for their children and we can have a renewed sense of pride in our country.
On the point on taxation, we must be clear with people. For those who earn least and for those who earn most, they are not seeing a reduction in their tax bill at the moment. And actually, the tax burden overall is at a record high. So absolutely, you have done your cut to national insurance, but it is not as simple as you have just suggested.
Well, if I could just answer that, because you've said obviously a very important thing. Well, for those on the lowest incomes, we raised the national insurance threshold, the personal allowance, so that you can now earn £1,000 a month without paying any tax or national insurance. We already did that. That disproportionately obviously benefits the lowest paid. The national living wage has gone up by record amounts last year and this year, and the proportion of people in the lowest pay is the lowest on record. And you talked about tax cuts. As I said, an average person earning £35,000 from this weekend is seeing a tax cut worth £450.
But overall,
that is meaningful. That's going to make a difference to people like Gary and everyone else.
And I'm not
and that is my priority going forward, is cutting people's taxes.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you next. And overall, the tax burden is higher than it's ever been. And many people will see an improvement from what you've done this set of changes, but many people also will not. You told the Sunday Telegraph that
27 million people in work will see a tax cut as a result of what we've done this weekend.
You told the Sunday Telegraph your priority is cutting taxes, not more government spending. And you said the only way to do that is to have a smaller public sector. So which bits of the public sector do you want to shrink?
Well, it's about the rate of growth between the economy and the rate of growth in public services. So my priority going forward, which the Chancellor also reiterated at the weekend, our joint priority for the country is to make sure that we control spending, control welfare, so that we can cut people's taxes.
So who's going to lose their benefits then?
And that's what we've done over the past year. Because we've managed the economy responsibly, halved inflation, said no to lots of things that people wanted us to do. We've been talking about public sector pay earlier. There's an example of why it's the wrong thing to do, to just say we should say yes to whatever people want. But we just had that conversation. There's an example. Again, by the way, Keir Starmer opposed any one of those difficult decisions, and I'm sure you'll ask him when he's here which ones he agrees and doesn't agree with.
He said repeatedly he'll be
here
this week.
But that's how you cut people's taxes. It requires discipline. It requires making those difficult decisions, and that's what I've done.
But you've said the only way to cut taxes is to have a smaller public sector, and you've said that you've pointed to the welfare budget. So who will expect to have less generous welfare payments?
I didn't just point to the welfare budget. It's across the board. It's about discipline on public sector. No, it's about discipline on public sector pay. So there's one example which we've done last year, finding ways to make fair pay settlements. Actually, I made a decision before that as Chancellor, which is to reduce our aid budget. Right, that's something that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party opposed, so I'm sure when he's here next week you'll ask him about that. Now, when it comes to welfare, I'm happy to talk about that. What we've seen over the past couple of years is a very significant rise in the number of people who are being deemed unfit to work. And that's something that is concerning to me. I believe very strongly in the importance of hard work and rewarding hard work, which is why we're cutting taxes on work as of this weekend very significantly. Now, in the last decade, that system hasn't been reformed at all. And you've seen the number of people who are signed off has tripled. Now, do I think our country is 3 times sicker than it was a decade ago? The answer is no. I think the system is not working as it was designed to work. And now we are bringing forward reforms that will mean that we look at the eligibility for who is signed off sick. That won't affect all those on existing benefits. It will come in over time on people who are newly presenting to the welfare system. And that is something I think is the right thing. It's about fairness. It's about making sure that everybody who can work does work. And for everyone who is working hard, we reward that hard work with tax cuts. That is a Conservative approach. It's one that I think is right for our country. And again, I'm sure you'll ask Keir Starmer next week, does he agree with that or not? Because I haven't heard an answer on that question.
Trying to helpfully suggest lots of questions for Keir Starmer, who I remind our viewers will be here this week, next week. This week, you are here to answer about your approach. Now, we will talk more about your approach and the election in a few minutes. But I want to touch on a few things that have really raised people's eyebrows in the last few months. Now, the scandal at the post office has shone a light on how many lives were ruined, and ITV Drama has really highlighted what happened there. We'll be talking to one of the sub-postmasters a bit later, but Susan Knight, who was a postmistress, has this question for you, and you can watch it on there.
What are you going to do to ensure that we get fair and final compensation, not in dribs and drabs? It's rightfully given and not at a snail's pace. Please stop making us still feel like victims.
Now, I want to remind our viewers that the post office is wholly owned by the government. So that perhaps point has not been made that much. Only 11 out of 475 of the full and final compensation deals have been completed. can you set a deadline? Can you tell people like Susan when it's all going to be sorted out?
So look, everyone has been shocked by watching what they have done over the past few days and beyond, and it is an appalling miscarriage of justice. Obviously, it's something that happened a very long time ago in the 90s, but actually seeing it and hearing about it again, it just shows what an appalling miscarriage of justice it is for everyone affected, and it's important that those people now get the justice that they deserve.
Should they all be exonerated?
And that's what the compensation schemes are about. So the government has paid out about almost 150 million pounds to thousands of people already. Of course we want to get the money to the people as quickly as possible. That's why there are interim payments of up to, I think, £600,000 that can be made. There are 3 different schemes available, and for anyone who's affected, they should come forward, talk to the relevant bodies so they can get their case worked through as quickly as possible.
But will you take extra measures on top of those? There's a report this morning that your Justice Secretary is considering looking at either exonerating everybody, that's a recommendation that has been made, or taking the Post Office's ability to investigate and prosecute away. Would you like to see that happen?
So the Justice Secretary is looking at the things that you've described. It wouldn't be right to preempt that process. Obviously, there's legal complexity in all of those things, but he is looking at exactly those areas that you've described. It's right that we find every which way we can do to try and make this right for the people who were so, I said, wrongfully treated at the time. The compensation is a part of that. But as you say, there are legal things that may be possible as well, and that's what the Justice Secretary is looking at.
So those are potentially on the table.
Again, I wouldn't want to preempt or speculate on it, but those are all the types of things that are being looked at.
What has also really riled people, though, is the mess around PPE procurement during COVID. Now, I'm sure that you saw before Christmas, Michelle Mone, the former Conservative peer, admitted that she had lied about her involvement with a PPE deal. But she also believes very strongly that she and her husband have been made scapegoats. Now, there's a criminal investigation, and I wouldn't expect you to comment on that, but many PPE contracts seem to have gone wrong. There was £9 billion of waste. How are you trying to get money back from other companies that were involved in waste of billions of pounds during the pandemic? And will anybody else be held accountable?
I think, look, the first thing to say is that anybody who took advantage of an incredibly difficult time for our country to either defraud the public or do things that were illegal should be pursued with the full force of the law. Like, we were all going through an awful time as a country, and the job was to get PPE to those on the front line who needed it. Everyone will remember how stressful that was. And if people were, as I said, trying to take advantage of that system and defraud the taxpayer, that's completely and utterly wrong. It's appalling, and we should pursue them with the full force of the law.
And do you believe that other people did?
I said that there are processes in place that the government has as a public sector fraud authority and others that do those investigations and that diligence. Where we believe that that's happened, the government will of course take action. And as you said, in this particular instance, the government has taken legal action against the company in question, which is why I can't comment. And more generally, you wouldn't expect me to comment on individual cases, but I can tell you that I, of course, take the matter incredibly seriously. It's wrong if that happened. And where there is evidence of it, of course, the government will pursue people with the full force of the law, because that's the right thing to do. And people should not be able to get away with things like that.
Let's talk politics then. You said this week the general election is going to be in the second half of the year. It seems, though, like some of your MPs are already trying to make it happen in a sort of slow and painful way by making their own decisions to pack up and go home and to stand down. Chris Skidmore, Tory MP, has said he's off this week. He wasn't very obliging about what you've been doing in government. There have been 5 by-elections already since you've been Prime Minister. 53 Tory MPs have already said that they're going to stand down. How can our viewers have confidence in your project when so many of your own team, or meant to be of your own team, are walking away?
Well, it's been a tough time for our country over the past year or two, with the legacy of COVID and the impacts that's had on backlogs, the war in Ukraine, the pressure that's put on inflation and energy bills. But I genuinely believe that we've turned a corner. I think the country is now pointing in the right direction. The plans that we've put in place are starting to deliver the long-term change that our country needs to see. And my view would be that we've got to, my job is to talk to everybody and show that we've got to stick with the plan, because the plan is starting to work to deliver the change that the country needs, the long-term change that the country needs. We've been talking about that already in this interview, the progress that we've been making. Of course I know there's more to do, but progress is being made. The country is now pointing in the right direction, and if we stick to the plan, we can continue to deliver that long-term change the country needs, and that's ultimately how we'll provide everybody with the peace of mind that the future is going to be better for their children and that they can have a renewed sense of pride in the United Kingdom. And that's what I'm setting out to deliver.
Long-term change, you said a few times. I think we might have heard a slogan in there. Keir Starmer set out one of his mantras for the public this week. He's going with Project Hope. But I asked some of your colleagues what their slogan for the Conservative Party would be in the next election. Here's a select few. Secure the recovery was one MP's suggestion. Things can only get better. But a PG version of what was said to me, we're a bit rubbish, but the other lot would be tons worse. Which one of them would you pick?
Well, it's not about slogans. It's actually far more important than that, right? It's about making a difference to people. And as I said, we have had a tough time, but the plans we've put in place are working. We're making progress. We're pointing in the right direction. And the choice now is to stick to the plan, right? And that's what I'm going to do, because the plan will deliver the long-term change that our country needs. It's starting to do that. And if we stick to it, then we can ensure that everyone, as said, had peace of mind that the future is going to be better for their children and that we can have a renewed sense of pride in the UK. Look, that's my job for the year. That's what I'll be out and about talking to people about. And as I said, I feel upbeat because of the progress we've made and the fact that I know we're now pointing in the right direction.
OK. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here live with us in the studio. Let us know what you thought. You can send us an email as ever, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. Or if you're social media inclined, use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and we will try to get to some of your comments a bit later in the show. Let's get the thoughts then of our panel. Louise, I think we did hear a slogan quite a few times. Stick to the plan, long-term change that's starting to work. What do you think?
Well, I feel a bit sad, actually, because we're in just the most extraordinary place in our country. I've just done this series called Fixing Britain on Radio 4, and we need to fix Britain. And I didn't take from that any sense that there's an acceptance that things are as bad for people as they are, Laura. Things are really bad for an awful lot of people out there. And spin is such a dangerous thing. To say those are the facts when they're not the facts, they're really not the facts. You know, from the boats, which is just a headline rather than give me an immigration policy, to the latest, let's crack down on welfare. Well, they always crack down on welfare. If they were going to crack down on welfare, why haven't they done it by now? And as far as I can see, it isn't working. And so you're in this invidious position when the guy's running into a general election. He's probably quite a decent bloke. He seemed to be a fairly all right chancellor, despite all of the terrible things. And there he is, selling nonsense. I mean, it just rang hollow, one thing after the other. And I can't help, I can hear it in my tone, feel a cross between angry and upset. And the kick as well around junior doctors. People need to know that people who've trained for 7 years and hold our lives in their hands. These aren't trainees, these aren't medical students. We're paying them £15 an hour. I mean, it all rings hollow. And what I wanted was some acceptance that actually Britain is we're pretty low, actually. And a lot of people in Britain will not feel these tax cuts. And the idea that all of these people are benefit scroungers, when most of them are working, the vast majority of people on benefit are working. So, yeah, I'm not the happiest person to start the programme, I'm afraid.
I mean, Fraser, spin and nonsense, Louise says. Is that fair?
In some cases, yes, it is. In some cases, not. I mean, he probably will. He probably will make progress this year on things like inflation, on mortgage rates, and perhaps on immigration. But where he's not, for example, take his tax line. He's talking about taxes that are falling, national insurance. He isn't mentioning the stealth taxes, the way that the thresholds are going down. They will raise 4 times more money than his tax cuts will cut. So overall, taxes are going up. If you're a cleaner working 35 hours a week, your income tax is going to go up by 50% due to these stealth taxes. So yes, you can be Jesuitical as he was there, saying, somebody on 35 grand won't be affected by these threshold changes. But millions more are going to be taken into income tax, into the higher rate of income tax. Exactly. That's how taxes are going up.
His point, though, is that 27 million people are going to benefit from these changes in particular. And after pressure from the Conservative backbenches to do something on tax, to cut some kinds of tax, he has been able to do that after a very difficult time.
He has, but he should also be, I think, be more credible if he were to say yes. And as a result, taxes overall are now rising less fast than they would otherwise, but they are going up. And on welfare, again, he's talking about the changes he will make. What he didn't tell you is that his own Department of Work and Pensions, they will assess his plans and say, what are they going to do? That came out a few weeks ago, didn't get any publicity, but that said that the welfare bill is going to rise by something like 920 people a day are going to be added onto the disability and benefits rules because the reforms are not enough. It's well-intentioned, but it's not enough to stop a massive increase in welfare and therefore taxation.
John, what did you make of it? I mean, these two have been given him both a pretty hard time. What would your review be?
Fascinating to watch the arc of the interview. In the central part, there seemed to be much more frustration. There seemed to be a petulance and an impatience that sort of simmered up through. And at the beginning, this phrase that you often hear in interviews, I haven't read the documents, so it would be wrong of me to comment. I haven't read the documents. It does seem rather surprising how few documents very important politicians seem to read. Maybe, I think that probably just gives a licence for a little bit more vagary in the answers, a bit more room to move.
But do you believe Rishi Sunak when you hear him speak, though?
It seems to be a great sense of frustration and dealing with impossibility and just trying to make it seem as perceivably organised as possible. But there does seem to be a hollowness there and this sense of, stick with the plan. But to be in denial about those aspects of the plan, which really should be done away with.
The key issue is really people need to tell the truth. And in a way, some of the things that aren't right, like nobody thought that COVID would come along and it would take us off our feet. I certainly didn't predict the Ukraine war, but some of the things, though, are made, and we have to respond to those in a way. I think government has to be responsible, and it's not just about hope. It's actually knowing how your government works, knowing what you can be in control of. And I think the sort of knee-jerk empty promises where you just hang on to a soundbite will honestly get them all in difficulty if that's the way they're going to do it. It's sort of, there is no point telling me that, yes, inflation may be going down, but if actually wages aren't keeping up with that and I have less money in my pocket and food costs much more, we have over 11 million people who can't afford their meals, are using food banks, and can't keep the show on the road. So that's a huge proportion of our entire population.
Except there are, though, Fraser, people loyalists to Rishi Sunak who would say, look, he inherited chaos after Liz Truss, very, very difficult problems after COVID, and of course with what happened in Ukraine that pushed energy prices up through the roof. And he has at least brought back some order and some calm into the Conservative Party, and he is now taking the kind of action on immigration that many of them wanted to see. Do you think he gets credit for that at all from Conservative voters?
I think the problem is that he is take small boats, for example. They are going down by a third. That's a very big achievement. I think we're going to see that throughout more of the year. He's also right about NHS waiting lists. He basically said quite something important to you right there. He was saying that if the strikes stop, the waiting lists will start to come down. I think he's right on that as well. The problem is that he's promised even more. He didn't promise to reduce the small boats, he promised to stop them. So against the very high bar he set himself, this time last year when he laid out his 5 pledges, his progress doesn't seem that impressive.
Do you think the 5 pledges were a mistake?
I think he was wrong to pledge what he could. He told you there he always thought NHS waiting lists would come down in the March of 2024. If he always thought that, then why this time last year did he say he promised to bring them down last year? So I think he overpromised, which has served to make the progress he's made look less impressive.
Now you have to look very carefully at the small print.
I mean, isn't the other issue, though, that if you pick one thing, you can distort the system. So the fact none of us can get appointments with our GPs, that actually, all sorts of things are wrong with the NHS. The fact that people are demoralised beyond in the NHS who work there. We have ambulances queuing to get into A&E departments, and that predates any strikes.
It might be very different at the end of the year, which is why it's the election.
Picking one thing doesn't sound anything to a person that lives in the country.
Targetitis has long been a problem for government. You do something, it's that whack-a-mole and a problem pops up. Initiativitis, targetitis.
I have a list.
You have a list. It's Louise's little list. Excellent. Well, all three of you, thank you very much for now. We'll be back with you at the end of the show. Now, this story sounds hard to believe, but as we discussed with Rishi Sunak, the drama, Mr. Bates and the Post Office has really focused mind on what happened to thousands of people who ran post offices who were wrongly accused of stealing money because the computer system went wrong. Some of them went to jail, Many lost their jobs and some of them lost everything. We heard the Prime Minister saying the government would do what it can to help a few minutes ago, and there is an official inquiry. But many, like Lee Castleton, who we'll speak to in a second, say they've had their lives ruined. Lee was pursued through the courts and had to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds in costs and went bankrupt. Here's how he's portrayed in the series.
I've got to show them it's not just me. Lisa, the post office are suing us for £26,000, which we didn't steal, and we haven't got hanging around in piggy banks. OK.
Well, we can speak to Lee now, who joins us from Yorkshire. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme. I think you were listening to Rishi Sunak when we asked him about what had gone wrong with the post office. What did you make of the promises that he made to try to help sort things out?
Morning. It's such a complicated thing and so combative. DBT and Post Office themselves are actually administering the compensation schemes, of which there are 3. I'm involved in one of those compensation schemes. The victims are traumatised. It's been a long time, over 25 years, and £135 million has been paid to some of the victims, but we've had £150 million plus paid to lawyers. These lawyers are putting lots of pressure. It's difficult. The whole schemes are difficult. We're just normal people, run-of-the-mill people. We have legal people with us, but it's so difficult. It's like a war. And why is that? Why would anybody put Post Office and DBT in charge of recompensing the victims?
Is that one of the things that you would like to see, Lee? Is someone else take charge of giving the pot and distributing the money to people like you who lost so much? I know you've had some compensation, but not enough to cover the terrible costs that you had to pay out.
I would love it to be taken out of the hands of the people that really, caused it in a way. And this is not just a computer issue. This is a people issue. People took people to court. People made decisions based on faulty data that they probably knew was faulty. There's so many differences, so many problems out there that really to have a completely isolated, separate review and compensation scheme just makes more sense.
Do you feel now this drama has thrown such light on it that you have confidence now that it might finally get resolved? I mean, it's so interesting to hear you talk about it as if it's been a war. It's so obvious how difficult this whole situation has been. Do you have confidence now people are finally paying attention?
Well, I hope that pressure comes to bear. That's what we've tried to do for years. It's been very difficult to be able to push our cause. And as Alan Bates rightly says in the drama, we're just little skin people. We're just people from your village shop or your local post office. And it's been really hard to drum up support. It's been very difficult to get people to believe.
Are you angry?
Very. Really, really angry.
And what do you hope people watching this morning will take from hearing you speak about it?
I'd like people to contact their MP, put pressure on people to help us. The group has always needed help. We've had some fantastic people help us through this along the way, and people that continue to help us. But if there's one thing that I have learned, it's support makes this work. It's very lonely being the only one, as the post office would constantly tell each of the victims. So now we're together in this, and we just need to keep walking forward, no matter what the punches are, no matter how hard the war gets. We just need to keep pushing.
Lee Castleton, thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning. We appreciate your time, and we're all sorry to hear how stressful it's been for you. So thanks very much for telling us your story and being with us today. Thank you. Now, this week, the Labour leader Keir Starmer set out his New Year pitch to voters. His speech had the word hope 18 times and change 22 times. Subtle, easy to say, but harder to prove what that actually means. Well, Bridget Phillipson wants to be the Education Secretary if Labour wins the election, and she's back in the studio with us this morning. So let's talk about what that might mean if you end up in charge of schools. Now, you've told the Sunday Times this morning, after a big rise in absenteeism, kids skipping school, that irresponsible parents are harming other kids. How many parents do you think are irresponsible?
Well, the challenge that we're seeing at the moment around persistent absenteeism means that 1 in 5 children are regularly out of school. That figure is set to rise to 1 in 4. That is a staggering number of children. It's damaging their life chances, and it's damaging the life chances of all of the children within a school community too. So what I'm saying to parents is that I know it can be tough, but it's really important that children are in school. Every day matters. But government, a Labour government, will be on your side, putting in place the support that you need to make it easier to get children to school. So improve mental health support, for example. I know that's a really big pressure at the moment that's making it hard for some children to be in school. That's why we will guarantee mental health counsellors in every secondary school, alongside that breakfast clubs in our primary schools too, to make it easier for our primary school children. There is a lot that government can do, and it's about that partnership, that reset and rebuilding of the relationship between government and schools, but also between schools and families.
You've been a bit more stern than that, though, if I may say. You've said in the Sunday Times, increasingly, parents have quite a relaxed attitude to children's attendance at school. Irresponsible parents who don't care about sending their kids to school are harming other kids' life chances, not just their own. So how many parents do you think are being irresponsible?
I think those parents that choose to take their children out of school for holidays or for trips or where it's not necessary should reflect seriously, because that damages children's life chances. They only get one chance at school. They only get one childhood. For those parents who are facing additional challenges and for children that are facing additional challenges, an incoming Labour government will make sure that we put in place the support that's needed to tackle that. But I do believe very, very strongly that yes, it's tough, but the thing that we have to do as parents in the best interests of our children is making sure they are in school. And that's why this week I'll be setting out Labour's long-term plan for how we deliver that and how we make sure that high and rising standards are a feature of our school system. Unless we have children in school, we just can't deliver that.
And you'll be making that big speech on Tuesday, but it's interesting you are now using this language and saying that some parents are irresponsible, because we asked you about this in September. And you said, actually, I don't think it's helpful to talk in that kind of language, lecturing people. It's not effective to do that without supporting them. So what's changed your mind? Because you are now saying there are lots of parents in this country who are irresponsible.
That was in the context of a discussion around fines and penalties. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think ratcheting up fines and penalties is the way to do it. But if I were Education Secretary right now, the clear message I'd be sending to parents is that every day at school matters. Because I want to make sure that we give all of our children the best possible start in life. They can't receive a brilliant education. We can't deliver high and rising standards in our schools if children aren't there. And currently, persistent absenteeism is the biggest barrier we are facing as a country in order to deliver that.
What would you actually do about it, though? You've mentioned more mental health support in school. You've mentioned breakfast clubs in school. But what would you actually do? And what are you actually committed to paying for if you think it's extra support that would get kids in school and get kids staying in school?
So in the speech I give later this week, I'll be setting out Labour's long-term plan around how we reset and rebuild that relationship with education between government and between schools and families. That will include mental health counsellors in every secondary school, community mental health hubs so that people can access the support they need as quickly as possible. We face huge waiting lists, often up to 2 years for young people even to be seen.
Have you got money from Rachel Reeves to pay for that extra help?
Absolutely. So politics for me is about the choices that you make, and I believe our children deserve better mental health support more than private schools deserve tax breaks. So we would end their tax breaks and we would put that money directly into making sure that all children and young people get the well-being and mental health support they desperately need at the moment.
Keir Starmer, initially when he stood for the leadership, said he would scrap university tuition fees. Then he said we wouldn't. Then he said he wouldn't. You now are not yet completely clear about what the plan is. Well, we don't know what your plans would be. Will fees go down?
The economy is in a total mess. I think that has to be the starting point, and an incoming Labour government would inherit a very, very big list of problems to fix. The university funding system overall, the future of our universities, is one of those really big challenges. I'm increasingly concerned when I speak with students about the impact that the system that's changed just actually in September is becoming more aggressive. It's putting ever more pressure, it will put ever more pressure on low and middle earners in particular. I'm determined that a Labour government will deliver a more progressive system. We need to look carefully at all of what that will involve. But my worry, when I hear from students at universities that they're working more and more hours in retail jobs, the impact that's having on their studies and on their access to other opportunities like internships or research trips, that absolutely has to change. The current system is unfair.
But you already said in June that repayments would go down, that graduates would pay less. Is that still your commitment? Will graduates pay less back for their university tuition fees? And can you tell us yet by how much? You said that way back in June. There's an election now this year.
So we will say more around the time of the election, but what I can commit to is a more progressive system overall, which can be delivered within the existing spending envelope. So there is lots of modelling out there that's been done that provides different elements that can be delivered. That means we can deliver a more progressive system, but wouldn't have to involve more taxation or more borrowing.
Would go down.
It is possible to deliver a system where payments for all graduates go down, even within the current spending envelope. So yes, absolutely, that's possible. That is what I am determined to deliver, and alongside that, a more progressive system overall that means low and middle earners aren't hammered in the way that they are right now. Alongside that, what I would add is that I think the opportunity for young people to go to university is an incredibly important opportunity, and the dismissive and unpleasant nature of where the Conservative Party have taken this discussion is so often about other people's children.
Well, I've been asking about your plan. I just want to be crystal clear before we finish. For parents, families, anyone who's thinking about university listening this morning, you have just committed to saying repayments of fees will go down if Labour wins the next election.
We will deliver a more progressive system where low and middle earners pay less. But I want to make clear that university should be for all children who want that opportunity. I will not be putting up fresh barriers to opportunity like Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives.
Well, Rishi Sunak was here earlier. He's not here now to answer that, but Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much indeed for coming in to see us in the studio. It has zipped to 10 o'clock, and at the start of the programme, the start of this election year, we began by asking Rishi Sunak if he could defy political gravity, turn things round and win a fifth term for the Tories. He said his message, stick to the plan.
Of course I know there's more to do, but progress is being made. The country is now pointing in the right direction, and if we stick to the plan, we can continue to deliver that long-term change the country needs, and that's ultimately how we'll provide everybody with the peace of mind that the future is going to be better for their children.
Long-term change, stick to the plan. Well, you heard it here first at the beginning of 2024. Let's talk briefly, Louise and Fraser, about Keir Starmer, who'll be here next week. Fraser, how would you assess Labour's position at the beginning of this year?
Regarding the next election as an exorcism of a Tory party, and where they're going to be basically stand by and pass out the garlic, that's their role. They're not really saying much. But if Labour is going to offer a significant difference, then if Starmer's saying, trust me, I'm the man you can trust, I will bring stability. That's a word you hear a lot now. Tory mayhem, stability under Labour. Now, it's a perfectly plausible proposition, but if he is going to offer stability, then why has his long-term economic plan just fallen apart?
The 28 billion that they promised.
He was going to spend 28
plans,
billion every single year. That was going to be their mainstay. Just a couple of years ago, you can trust us, we're going to do this, you can take this promise to the bank. Now it's collapsed, and he's saying he's going to do it when his fiscal rules allow, i.e. never. So might there be just as much chop and change under Labour as there is in the Tories?
Louise, what do you think Keir Starmer needs to do, or is he away and clear if you believe the polls?
Well, I don't think I would I would literally not be complacent. I'm not somebody that follows polls obsessively, but I would not be complacent at all. And my advice to actually Keir Starmer is pretty similar to Rishi Sunak, which is tell the truth, get your facts completely straight, and don't sell people a pup. I mean,
do you think they are at the moment?
I think that they need to be tighter. I mean, I just listened to Bridget Phillipson say 1 in 4 people think it's OK not to send their kids to schools, and say fines and penalties don't matter. They do matter. You have to face consequences if you break rules, and that's a kind of really basic human and actually British instinct. If we have a rule, you break it, something has to happen. And I think so much of Westminster is completely out of kilter with the general public. I think Starmer is ahead in that I feel he's a man of integrity, honesty, and I think he knows that he has to get this right.
And John, There is a big other election this year, somewhere else across the pond, and we are very tight on time. But would you close the show for us as Trump and Biden?
Well, look, I'm going to win. I've already had Mount Rushmore redesigned. They're going to sculpt me on there, and they're going to take some of the others down. And as Joe would say, it's the year 2525. Bring it on. Bring it on.
Couldn't resist doing that as you were here today, as you so brilliantly did. UK politicians, last time you were with us on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for giving us a taste of across the Atlantic, because it will be a busy year in the United States and, of course, a busy one for us all here too. Thank you so much to my panel. Thank you for watching. It's great to be back with the first big interview of Rishi Sunak of the year. You can watch that again on the iPlayer. We'll be talking about it on this weekend's newscast on BBC Sounds later on. And next Sunday, as Rishi Sunak kept pointing out, Keir Starmer will be here as the long campaign of 2024 grinds into gear. Keir Starmer's desperate for a change of government. Rishi Sunak is desperate to hang on.
Shut up.
The decision, of course, most importantly, will be up to you.
Oh God, that sounds like a TV show. First of all, the government doesn't own the post office. The Tories sold the post office. Why would you say the government owns the post office when they don't, you fucking stupid cunt? Anybody want to fact check Laura Kuenssberg on this little matter? I'm pretty sure you got Google if you're that way inclined. The government doesn't own the fucking post office, ladies and gentlemen. They just don't. The Tories sold it for way less than it should have been sold. Just a fact. So yeah, for the fact that you fucking said that out loud is fucking astonishing. Second of all, election. Labour doesn't need to do anything to win the next election, other than people need to literally vote. That's it. It's that simple. Scottish people can help us out. Well, yeah, I don't know why people that asked, really. These conservatives, oh shit. Shittest fucking Tory governments ever. And the funny thing is, we haven't just had one of them, we've had many. David Cameron won one. And Boris Johnson. They were the last two prime ministers who were elected to be prime minister. The rest of them were just not elected. Oh wait, Theresa May, I think she was elected, right? Yeah. Theresa May. Three of them. So, Liz Truss and the sort of fuckwit weren't elected. Am I correct in that? Am I assuming? Yeah, that is correct, right? Technically, David Cameron weren't elected either, because it was a hung parliament. The only reason why he was prime minister, because the Lib Dems got into power with the Tories. So yeah, he wasn't elected either. Which is, if you read James O'Brien's book, which is weird, don't read it actually. But he says the people who broke Britain, his dad's one of them, because his dad was a newspaper mogul. If you know anything about James O'Brien from LBC, he's a fucking Tory, or used to be. Now he's turned into a Liberal Democrat or some shit. Fuck knows. Anyway, the country's fucked for many reasons, and a lot of the reasons are to do with how people see Britain, especially when they live in it. If you're white, you see completely different than if you're a minority, clearly. Brexit, for instance. Well, fuck the EU, so to speak, which we do. Why not? We're English, we fought the Germans, etc. You would do that. Xenophobes. It's kind of shocking that, like, politicians wouldn't know that. Do you get what I'm saying? You get all shitty journalists who basically lick ass, She didn't literally say, "Oh, by the way, you know that shit. We've all read the paper." Like, she read the same shit that I did. It's literally all over Twitter. It's a funny thing. You was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You literally said this. We've read it. I don't know what report, bro. It's you saying, put them in hotels, it's cheaper. What? Yeah. You said that. You said it. I can read it to you if you want. You don't want me to read that to you. So for other people who are in like white villages with hotels who are mad at migrants or whatever, blame that fucking motherfucker. Him. Blame him. He didn't want to send people to Rwanda because it's like, that's a stupid idea, which everybody can agree is a stupid idea. Everybody, even people who don't like migrants, can go, that's a stupid fucking idea. Can't we just send the SAS? Just like, what are you doing in France? That's what I want to know. What are you doing? We invaded Normandy. You telling me we can't capture a bunch of motherfuckers with boats before they send their boats with a bunch of fucking motherfuckers on them? Is that what you're trying to tell me? We've got nuclear weapons. Literally nuclear weapons, and you can't stop some motherfuckers sending boats. Really? Do I live in the Stone Age or some shit? And I'm confused. I really am confused. Oh, well, it costs money. You print that shit from thin air. Don't start telling me about money. At all. Another confusing thing that I noticed. Oh, well, the deficit and all that. That's all they mention, it. Debts, deficits. They don't tell you ever that they print that shit from thin air. Fiat currency. Bretton Woods. Hello? There's no such thing as the gold standard anymore, motherfucker. Just stop living in the 1930s, please. Thank you. Anyway. We're all broke. Nigga. I seen that shit last week. 5 weeks ago. On this very same show. With a chart from 2010. Broke. Not broke. Not broke. Not broke. Not broke. Not broke. Every single year. Raped and pillaged. Who got raped and pillaged, ladies and gentlemen? The fucking poor. And you know what they say? Public service. Costs a lot of money. Yeah, it does. Because we pay tax. Same shit when they tell you we can't build houses. Why? Why can't you build social housing? We paid for social housing ever since we've been building houses. It's called taxation. Like, what am I missing here? Am I missing something? Land developers, oh, the fucking middlemen. Them motherfuckers. So what, you can't build a fucking house? You want me to buy a house? Is that what you're telling me? You want me to buy a fucking house instead? Yep. We make housing associations. What the fuck's a housing association? One would ask oneself as a pleb. Oh, they're private companies that own the land that we sold it to. What? You did what, motherfucker? Yeah. We gave it to private corporations. That's what they're called, associations. That's why these get paid loads of money and no one collects your fucking bins. Where's all the money? I don't know. In the bank. Because the shit you should pay in rent to your council magically doesn't go there anymore, does it? Nope. Go straight to the bank. And the bank don't pay no tax. Which is mad. So what are we going to do? I've got a great idea. What is it? We're going to tax the poor people for being sick. What? Is that a good idea? Who gives a fuck? They won't notice anyway. I've got a better one. I'm going to make it a loan. I'm going to make them pay back their own money with the taxes that they paid. That's what I'm going to do. Ian Duncan Smith. I'm going to make the biggest loan shark scheme in the entire Western world, and nobody's going to pay any attention whatsoever because you're all dumb fuckers on TikTok to fucking whatever super programs you use. You don't pay attention in it. You just don't. Too busy going about your life, posting images of your food online like you're somebody. Nope. You're a dumbass fucking pleb. It makes me want to play Monty Python. A fucking nigger shows up and says, I'm king of the Britons. King of the fucking who, motherfucker? I'm sorry, what? King of the who? Who the fuck are the Britons? Exactly. Atkins and fucking Stanley. And these people expect you to believe their bullshit. And you just take it like a dickhead in the ass. You might as well bend over and just say, fine, thank you, whatever. Take me in the ass. Because you're getting raped. And you're not getting raped physically. Mentally. Shafted. Like, people are so strange. They complain about the weirdest shit and don't go to the basics. All the Palestinian Israeli shit that's been on the news lately. Nobody mentions God in this situation. No. That's far too complex for this scenario. Everybody's dying, and people don't know why they're dying. It's Hamas. It's the Israelis. It's Hamas. It's the Israelis. It's fucking God. Duh. It's like, point out the fucking obvious. Why are motherfuckers killing other motherfuckers? What are you doing? Well, even the Bible, Quran, Torah. Oh, okay, I get your point now. You're fucking crazy. You're both religious. Oh, well, you gotta think of the babies. You gotta think of the fucking, the other people. When the fuck I think about the problem? This is the point. We're all broke. Nah, man. Open a dictionary. Look at the word money. Look at it very carefully. Look at the word money. Anything with intrinsic value, motherfucker. Anything. The first fucking word is anything with intrinsic value. Money only has value when you give it value, you dumb fucking cunt. And someone's telling you the price of shit and you just say, yes sir, like a fucking nigger picking cotton in a field. Yes sir. That's the problem. You're fucking deluded. Hopefully in 2024, people start waking up to fucking dumb shit that's fucking obvious to most fucking niggas with a brain. But you're so dumb that you think we got no money? How'd you run out of money if you print it from thin air? Fucker. We can't pay the nurses. We can't pay the teachers. Yes, you fucking can, bitch. How fucking much tax does Amazon pay? Or Facebook? Or all these giant corporations? Or these billionaires? Motherfucker. If you were born right now and you could count to 1 right now, which is impossible, but let's say you could, because I'm being a dick, and then I gave you infinity while you're alive, you still couldn't count to 1 billion, you twat. But people got billions of monies. Billions. To do what with it? What are you doing with all that money? What are you doing with it? Sitting in a bank while people go to food banks? Food banks? That's a fucking joke. My country, your country, makes 2.2 trillion every year. We spend 80 billion on the NHS. The fucking benefit system's fucking shit. For one reason, nobody gets paid a living wage. The living wage is a fucking joke. Since the time when we invented the fucking steam engine, productivity, my ass. You should pay me more because I can use a fucking computer, not less, motherfucker. But you know where all the money goes? To the fucking top. The productivity has gone through the roof since the Industrial Revolution. Gone through the fucking roof. You still get paid the same fucking shit, motherfucker. Where's all the rich fucking poor people? I don't see any. You know why? Because the rich people are still fucking rich and you're still poor. Fucking bitch. People think that, like, changed. It's like shit's changed because you got an iPhone. You're still a bitch, nigga. That fucking shit's made in China by some fucking poor Chinese guy who gets paid 50p, and you're paying £1,000 to look flashy when you go out on a Saturday broke with your credit card because you're fucking broke. Get the point? Apple, slaves in China, and they charge you £1,000 for your phone, and you want to walk around like you're fashionable. The clothes that she's got on this TV show, made in China, and she's like, oh, look me, I'm smart. Get the fuck out of here, Trump. It's all a fucking illusion. Fucking crime against my fucking sanity is what it is. I have to put up these TV shows saying shit like the government owns the post office. No, it don't. That's a blatant lie. That's a blatant lie. Well, I have to listen to this shit, huh? So do you. Because you believe what these people are telling you is true. Bullshit. All bullshit. Fucking lot of them. Talking complete claptrap. Fucking ass clowns. Fuck. I hate the Tories. I want Labour back in power. Come here. And by the way, they're not perfect. I'm not saying Labour's gonna like fucking answer all my prayers. They ain't. You see my video. It only like recently one person said social housing. I was like, oh my god. She didn't say affordable. She said social housing. Council houses. The shit we pay for with our taxes. They're gonna build them. I mean, to be fair, gotta see it to believe it. But still, at least they fucking said it. Well, one person said it, which is Angela Rayner. She said it, so give her props for that. But we'll see it in her. Do I think the next election that Labour's gonna do anything special? No. I think they're gonna be as Labour gets, which is basically Tory light kind of shit. But I'm gonna be honest, I can't stand the Tories. They're just incompetent. I just want to change. I think most people in Britain, even if you don't really like the Labour Party, to be honest, I'm not that thrilled. Like, come on, I'm not. Neither are you. But would you rather have them than the Tories? Yes, please. Just get them out. Just please, for the love of God. Just for sanity. Get them fucking out. They're just so bad. So bad. Like, I grew up under a Tory government. Thatcher. She was a cunt, honestly. She proper was. A fucking, like, she stole my milk. In fact, she didn't steal, she took my milk. But, oh my God. She knew what she was doing. Like, literally she did. She had a game plan. These fuckers, clueless. I can't even list the amount of stupid shit I've had to put up with streaming these fucking retards. But I've had, like, I don't know where Dover is, ferries, just all kinds of weird fucking dumb. This trust, I mean, God, this trust is the highlight of the Tory years. This trust. How do you only be Prime Minister for 45 days and not have a general election? Let that sink in. Let that sink in. We had a Prime Minister that literally was kicked out of office and we didn't have a general election. It's like we live in North Korea and no one was like, oh, okay, that's fine. No, it's not fine. That's weird. So basically we've had a dictatorship since Boris Johnson got kicked out of office. You mightn't like Boris Johnson. I don't. He won an election. He was voted in by the British public. I know we're all mental, but he was still voted in. He literally won an election. Clearly pissed off a wall. But he still won it. Since when did these fuckers win an election? How is that democracy? If we didn't vote for these fucking clowns? Oh well, it's the Tory party. So does that mean we just don't need to go to the public? We can just go, it's the party? That sounds like North Korea. I'm just like, if that was any other country, we'd be like, that sounds a bit strange. Don't you think? Oh no, it's fine because we're all British. No, stop thinking backwards. We shouldn't drop our standards. Because we've got a bunch of fucking ass clown journalists and a bunch of people who clearly don't know shit about politics. They keep using that thing. Oh, another one. Like, stop doing that. Stop using some old lady who literally can't be asked and she's dying to say that we don't want an election when most of us do want one. We clearly want an election. We fucking hate this government because it's shit. Everybody, even Tory voters, know it's fucking shit. Get them out. Fuck's sake. And don't vote for the SNP either because they're fucking garbage too. Last point before I fucking go back to sleep. I literally woke up to fucking do this shit. Before I go, don't vote for the SNP. If you're Scottish, vote Labour. Because if you vote for the SNP, we're not going to get a Labour government that gets rid of the Tories. We'll be stuck with these fucking clowns for another 5 years and I'm getting on a boat. I will paddle my ass to France. By myself. Gonna be a bit of a mad one, but I'll fucking do my best. Fuck this government, it's shit. And so's the SNP. Vote Labour. We need Scottish people to vote Labour. Because proportional representation don't exist in our country. Just so you know. It just doesn't. So, vote Labour in Scotland, please. Get these fuckers out already. Okay, if you want independence, fine. Just wait 5 years. You're still going to be alive in 5 years or some shit. Do it then. Right? Do it then. Tories won't ever give you fucking votes anyway. Twats. Ugh. Ugh. Laura Kuenssberg, suck my fucking big black cock. Motherfucker. Hate a lot of them. Oh, I hate journalists because they're so bad at the job. And I hate the Tories because they're bad at just fucking being a government at this fucking point. Anyway, the post office is not owned by the government. Just to make that shit clear. It's not owned by... The government sold the post office, ladies and gentlemen. So, fact checked by yours truly, Stizor. The government does not own the fucking goddamn post office. The Tories sold it under George Osborne. Twats. For less than it should be.